Good morning, everyone. I'm here today with Alberto Pototschnig, Director of ACER and FSR Fellow Advisor, and our friend, of course. Alberto, I would like to take this opportunity today to have a little conversation with you on the current status of the gas market. Last week, the Gas Madrid Forum took place. I would like to have your views on well, let's say probably the most important question at the moment. Are we in a time of change? Do we have to think about new perspectives, about possibly a new European gas market design? We know that there are several studies going on, launched by the European Commission, the Quo Vadis study, the regulators here with their study on the future role of gas. It looks like everyone is looking for certainties. What do you think?
Well, first of all, a pleasure to have an opportunity to discuss these very important things with you. Well, there are studies because people are not sure as to what will happen in the future. And I think it's always good to test the current wisdom about how the market is performing. What we are seeing is that the market, the gas market in Europe is integrating. There are still different speeds. But the model seems to be delivering. Clearly, the world is changing. We know, for example, that there is more and more reliance on short-term price signals. Long-term contracts will eventually expire. That some of them may be renewed, but the perception that you have from the market is that shippers don't like to take long-term commitments now. So there may be a change in paradigm in the gas market, maybe not as radical as the one that we've seen in the electricity market with the great penetration of renewables. But I think the current model needs always to be sort of tested. And also there is, there was a gas target model which regulators proposed a few years ago, which had some recipes as to how to overcome some of the barriers, some of the shortcomings of the markets, and that is still being implemented. So I think it's good always to double check whether what we are doing is actually addressing the right issues.
Absolutely, and we know that ACER, this is one actually of the tasks, of the important tasks of ACER. Last week at the Gas Madrid Forum, you presented your newly published Market Monitoring Report for 2017. What has emerged? What's the status and which are the challenges to be addressed?
Well, there are many encouraging signs. For example, sourcing costs across Europe are getting closer and closer to each other. I mean, if you look what has happened over the last 3 years, you see that more and more jurisdictions face sourcing costs which are closer to what we consider as the reference, which is the sourcing cost in the TTF area. And it's also interesting that the harmonization, the approximation is not dependent on the vicinity or proximity of the sources for gas. You would expect, gas travels physically, so you would expect costs to be higher the more further away you are from the source. Now, this is not the case. What seems to play a bigger role is actually being close to a liquid competitive market. And this actually proves the fact that we need to have a liquid and competitive market across the Union, because that's what put pressures on sourcing costs and in the end deliver benefits to consumers. So over the last 3 years there's been quite a significant progress in this. There are still areas where sourcing costs are different, remarkably different. I guess we've also witnessed the fact that we have liquid markets, we also have still illiquid markets. We have markets where we do not yet achieve the minimum level of 3 competing suppliers. So there is still work to be done, but at least the direction seems to be the right one. We also looked at spreads between different markets and compared them with the transport cost, and we see that in most cases these spreads are lower than the transport cost. Now, one reading of this is that has to do with the long-term contracts. These contracts are sunk, and therefore, the arbitrage between markets are based only on the short-term costs. The other reading is clearly that the sourcing costs in these different markets are getting closer and closer. So again, a sign of market integration, liquidity, etc. So I think there are still areas where we have issues. I mean, apart from the annual market monitoring report, we also issue implementation monitoring report for the network codes, and we will soon issue one on the balancing market. And I think it is obvious to everyone that the way in which the network code is being implemented with the wide optionality that it offers, not always deliver the intended effects.
That's very interesting. You mentioned lots of interesting points. I would like to focus on the last one, the network codes. As you might know, the Florence School will soon be engaging in an online course on network codes on gas, together with ENSOC. So we are very happy and proud to engage in this new project. The network codes, as we know, are now in their, let's say, final phase of implementation. But you also mentioned that in some countries they are, let's say, more fully implemented than in others. Can we speak of a Europe with two speeds, as someone likes to say? And if not, what are the small, let's say, changes to be adjusted?
I wouldn't talk about Europe having two speeds. I would talk about Europe starting from different points. And therefore, some markets were closer to the kind of design that we have in mind as a target, and other countries started from further away. So obviously these latter markets would take a bit longer to get there, but we are seeing very promising signs also in markets that were traditionally a bit, behind.
Starting from behind.
Exactly, starting from behind, also with more problematic structures of the market. So I think, I take this as always very positive. If things are moving in the right direction, I think it's very positive, because for a long time, this market were really stuck with a single supplier, with no liquidity, etc. So moving is good, and some of them are actually moving quite fast. Network codes, as I said, they provide a set of rules which needs to be implemented, but we're not just interested in their implementation, we are also interested in their effects, that they deliver the intended effects, because if they don't deliver, then maybe we need to revisit the rules. The final objective of implementation is not just ticking the box of, yes, we've applied this. And in this respect, I think, a training on network codes, which is not just reading or explaining the rules, but also explaining what the rules are intended to deliver, I think is very good, because that is where I think the knowledge needs to be shared, so that those who are involved or those who will be affected, and I think in general all those who are interested in the energy sector knows what to expect and how to assess whether what we see is what we were expecting.
Great, point taken. We will develop our course keeping this in mind, and of course that's the main purpose of the whole course, to try and reach as many people as possible, the interested ones, the affected ones even more, so that the level of understanding about the effects and of the network codes is the same, and everyone can take the best advantage out of those. Great, thank you very much, Alberto, for all this reasoning, and see you soon.